guys, thanks for joining us this week. We have another industry professional from the sports industry. I am so excited about this career path and cannot wait to learn more. So let's go ahead and get started. Jon, how are you today?
I'm awesome. It's great to be here.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Would you mind taking just a few minutes, tell us who you are, what you do, and where you're from?
Sure. Well, my name is Jon Cudo, as you set up in the intro. Most people just call me Cudo. I was originally from the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, and I lived in Portland, and now I live in a suburb of Cleveland. My career path, I started as a mascot performer. I've done some production since then, but I've never really left performing. But that's coming because I'm getting a little old now to do trampoline dunks and jump in a dog seat for 4 hours. But in the end, I just love creating a show for people. It started in 1989, so I'm that old, with the Minnesota Timberwolves. That were expansion team at the time. And I went from there and I started performing with Nike with a character called Swoosh Man, which you've probably never seen, but that's okay. It was mostly international work. That group was called NSC, which Nike Sports Entertainment. It was short-lived, lasted a couple of years. But after that, I left there and I started my own business called Markout Productions and a website called GameOps.com. And I've been plugging along with that now for about 23 years. Along the way, I've done a little more mascot performing, including Spot the Fire Dog for the Portland Fire and the Cleveland Cavaliers mascot Moondog for 17 years, including the 2016 World Championship. So that was kind of a fun little thing. Currently a little bit in limbo, in the event world. It's sort of quiet now. So I've done some work with live events with the Cavaliers and the World Wrestling Entertainment, and it's all sort of in limbo now. And I'm actually a homeschool teacher's assistant for a sixth grader, which is great.
Yes, I think we're all kind of in limbo right now.
Yeah.
I know I'm so excited to get back to sporting events and live entertainment, as I'm sure you are as well. It sounds like you've had a very exciting career journey. I mean, honestly, I had no idea that people could have a career as a professional mascot. That's amazing. So could you tell us a little bit about what does your responsibilities look like as a performer? When you wake up on game day, can you kind of take us through what that looks like?
Well, sure. As a mascot, I mean, a big part of your job is just creating those entertaining moments for people. And whether that's at games, appearances, social media hits, that kind of thing, it all surrounds that. So it's writing, it's performing, it's gathering and making props sometimes. And most importantly, it's doing laundry, which is a really big part of my job. So every hour in costume, every hour performing, you probably have about 6 or 7 other hours just used to support that time.
Yeah. So you mentioned writing and preparing. Do you come up with all of your skits and performances, or do you have someone that does that for you?
I wish I had someone to do that for me, but no. Most of the time, as a performer, you're doing all that, and again, like a lot of the performing arts, you're actually kind of borrowing from people. You're watching things on YouTube clips. You're watching comedians or other mascots, and then you're trying to massage that and make that material your own. And create something around your persona that really fits and works. So it's kind of a blend. There's no one else. I mean, sometimes you'll work with people, other staff, but for the most part, you're the one honing in that story, trying to write that skit, trying to make that moment, and then refining it as best you can. And a lot of times it is just a work by yourself. So.
Yeah. So you took us through your career journey once you got into the industry. Could you tell us a little bit about your path from high school to really how you got into this industry? How did that happen?
So it was funny. I went to college at North Dakota State in Fargo, North Dakota. And I had done high school theater. And so I went to a theater audition just because it's kind of like, it's what I did. It's who I knew. So I went to this an audition, and I'm sitting there talking to another actor who's trying out, and he's like, "Oh, we don't have a mascot right now for the college." And I was like, I always wanted to do that. He's like, "Well, you should come try out." So it all started right there, and I tried out, and I got that job. And 2 years later, I went from working in college, doing it just as a side activity, to getting a job with the Timberwolves. So again, it was real quick, and I just put my college career on pause because it was just, again, it's kind of a crazy opportunity, and it's kind of a once in a lifetime thing. Apparently it lasts a lot longer than I thought it was going to last, but that's how it all started.
That is so interesting. I love that. I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk a little bit about your production company. So, what are some things that you do through that? I know game presentation is such a big aspect of any sporting event. So, could you tell us a little bit more about what exactly does that mean?
Sure. So my business, it kind of centers around my website, gameops.com. And that actually started sort of through my performance, where I was touring around the country as Crunch, the Minnesota Timberwolves mascot. And I was seeing things that happening in minor league baseball, minor league basketball, college basketball. I would see timeouts, and I'm like, that's a really cool promotion. And I realized there was really nothing connecting like a team in Des Moines, Iowa, with even the Minnesota Timberwolves who were that close and in the same sport. And so I realized there needs to be like some kind of a hub and connectivity. And nowadays with the internet, obviously that seemed obvious, but in 1993, that was like, there was no way to connect those pieces unless you just kind of happen to know somebody. And so in 98, I sort of set out with my website to connect those people. And a lot of what I do right now is just like tell the stories of what teams are doing. Again, like I'm working on a piece right now about the Milwaukee Admirals, which is a minor league hockey team. And I'm just trying to tell the story about what they're doing for their game presentation and game operations. And I share that out. And so if you are a professional soccer team in LA, you might read that and be like, hey, we could do something like that. And so it's really about sharing and about connecting teams and ideas. And then along the way, obviously that's more of a reporting side. And then along the way, there's some business opportunities where I'll say, hey, and here's a prop that they use, or here's some resources what they do. And those are the kind of things that we try to sell as part of the business to monetize that.
Yeah, so it sounds like a very big professional learning network almost. So I love that. It's always good to share. And I think that's such a huge part of any industry is collaborating and connecting with other people that are in the industry. So I love that. My next question for you is, I'm sure along your journey, just like everyone else, you have probably experienced some obstacles that you've had to overcome. Would you mind talking a little bit about how you've overcome obstacles and maybe any advice that you have for students that will ultimately face their own obstacles?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question, because that's really the core of, working and being professional is finding those things. You get stuck on something and then you work through it. The one thing I will say is, especially in my role as a mascot, it was just kind of uncharted territory. Like everything was, you just have to figure it out. And so I think being young and hungry like I was, and hopefully I still am, the work environment, I developed habits that help me grow and help me just like, I always think of it as kind of figure it out. Like when you're an entrepreneur or a solopreneur with no one else here, there's no tech department. And so if something goes wrong with your email or your website, like I got to figure it out. And so just like cultivating those skills and just finding ways to like work around things and make things happen. That's a really important skill to have and to teach yourself. I think back when I was booking shows, when I was Crunch, I had to like go on and figure out what now is called CRM. It's like customer resource management or relationship management. But again, it was like that process of like, I have to like organize all these different teams, figure out how to do it. But again, it was like, I was, reading, I'm a mascot. I'm supposed to be out there falling downstairs and, trying to make people laugh, but I'm at home reading books on customer management and like growth in terms of phone calls and sales leads. And so it's like, again, I think the skill that I learned was really just like try to teach yourself how to learn and how to take in new information.
Yeah, always be learning. And there's so many opportunities to learn. I think so many times young people think that education stops with high school or with college, but you're constantly learning as you go throughout your career journey. So even as a mascot, I love that. So just like many students probably didn't realize that a professional mascot was a career path, there's probably other careers that you've discovered along the way that maybe you had no idea existed. Would you mind sharing a few of those careers that you've discovered with our students?
I will. And I will say I love this program. I think back to when I was a high school student. One of the biggest like moments for me in terms of like opening doors and figuring out what I wanted to do was I had a program, not quite like this, but it was like go out and find somebody in the field that you want to work with and see what they do. And again, like I was just like, a kid with a blue collar family, and like I just didn't know many professionals, and I wanted to be an industrial engineer. And so I went out and I watched a guy, and I was just like, this is like what your whole world is. And so I love this perspective of like trying to figure out what's out there, because again, everyone asks you when you want to grow, what you want to do when you grow up, and when you're 6, you want to be a fireman or a basketball player, and like it comes down to it's like you got to figure this out, and knowing what's out there is really important. And for me, again, I didn't know that this was a profession or a career. And some of these things are evolving too, like a game director role or a live event producer. Those roles actually didn't exist when I started. There were, I worked in the NBA in 1989. There were 0 game directors. And now there's like game presentation departments where there's, 8 to 12 people on a staff for every team. Again, there was 0 when I started. So like those jobs sort of like get created and they, out of whole cloth, like they didn't exist. And again, like for me, it's like just getting exposed to all those things is an amazing way to go. So I appreciate your program, and I hope the kids realize this is really how you find out like what you want to do is like see what other people are doing and find that path.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned a live event director. You've talked a little bit about different promotions, and a lot of the students that are going to be watching this are probably in a marketing class or maybe even a sports and entertainment marketing class. Would you mind giving a few examples of different promotions or different things that you've seen in the industry that maybe are super creative that really gets people excited about what's happening?
Yeah, so I'll talk about this one that's fresh in my head. So the Milwaukee Admirals just did this promotion, and they're one of the teams. There's probably 20 or 30 teams like this in the country who just suspended their whole season. They don't have any games this year, and so they have a staff sitting there, kind of like, what are we going to do? And they mark their anniversary of their last game with what they call the virtual game. So they made an entire presentation on Twitter that mimicked what it was to go to a game. And when in game presentation and marketing, I mean, really part of your job is to draw people in. I mean, you have to bring people to the game. And whether that's, if your team's winning, that's great. You're going to get fans, and people who are basketball fans or hockey fans, they're coming anyway. But for fans who aren't fans, we always talk about it as 31 flavors. When you go to Baskin Robbins, like if you just had vanilla and chocolate, you're not going to sell a ton of ice cream, but they have 31 flavors. There's something for every single person. And so when you do event marketing, you're really thinking about like, what am I serving up to all these different customers, and how am I going to interest a 7-year-old boy and mom and dad who might love basketball, and mom might have nothing to do with it. But again, you have to sell that a whole family. So you're trying to create a presentation that's going to draw everyone in and get them interested. And so, I think back to what the Admirals were doing. They're mimicking their show. They're doing all those things that you do in the community, whether it's, thanking frontline workers, they're thanking, police and firefighters, they're doing Smile Cam. Again, it's like all these pieces where you're just, they did, the Mascot did a couple of skits, the hosts were introducing things, then they went to live action. They showed guys scoring goals in hockey. So we look what they did, and they're serving up a presentation that's going to like touch a lot of different fans in a lot of different ways. And again, that's really a great example of what game presentation looks like, and like trying to draw in people and trying to interest people who have different interests.
That's so interesting. And when you think about going to a game or going to an event, there really truly is something for everyone. And I love that you mentioned that, because, a lot of times we're there and we only see what interests us. But if you really pay attention and observe, you'll see that every single element is put in place for a reason.
Oh yeah. It's very thought out. And again, it's something that you're continually growing and trying to evolve it into something more. It's like, again, a lot of people think you have a mascot just for kids, but again, if your mascot program is only for that, it's like you're leaving out other pieces. You want to like make sure that, and if it is only for kids, you want to make sure you have other programs that are going to draw in other people with different interests.
Absolutely. So my next question for you is, what is something that you wish you would have learned at a younger age?
That's another great question. I remember really distinctly, I was in high school. I was like high school was relatively easy. And I'm sure there's a lot of kids in this program right now who are like, yeah, I can kind of coast through, sleep through class and not study much, and I'm still going to get a B+. And if I try it all, I'm going to get an A. Well, what happens as you proceed along is you realize like it's the people who really know how to learn and know how to study. And I remember like I got to college and it was like it was harder. And then by the second year, I was like, whoa, I can't. I was really struggling. And that's, by the way, that's not why I went for a mascot job. Escape that. But what I found was I really needed to reevaluate how to learn and how to study. And there's probably a different call. But one thing is that like really understanding how to like dig deep and how to know material to the point where you're like proficient at it, whether it's test taking or getting a job and cultivating those skills. Like knowing how to learn, I think is a really important thing, and knowing how to study. And that's like study groups and being able to like take information in, process it, and then teach it to somebody. Because if you can teach it to somebody, then you probably know it. And so I wish I would have learned that earlier. I mean, I think studying that transition into college would have been easier. And when I went back to college, like that second year was tough because I didn't really know that. And I was spending more or less time studying how to study as opposed to just studying. So that's something I wish I would have really honed in on and focused more on, like at the end of high school, early in college.
Absolutely. And that's such good advice. And it's advice that you can take with you forever because, like we mentioned earlier, you're always going to be learning. And if you can develop those skills at a younger age, it's definitely going to help you with your future. So, the last question that I have for you, and then we have a few questions from students, is what is some actionable advice for students if they are interested in working as a professional mascot or maybe even in game presentation? What is something that they can do today while they're still in high school to prepare them for that career path?
Well, again, a lot of it is taking interest and networking. Find like you talked about, like this is a chance to like find people who work in that industry. If you have a local team, if you have a local minor league baseball team, it's like going on and getting on there. A lot of teams have like these essentially promotion teams. And actually, the woman with the Admirals who I've been talking to, she's been with the Admirals for 20 plus years now, and I don't think she's 35 yet. I'm not even sure. But my point is, she started way back then as a promotions team member, where she's running around throwing T-shirts. But again, that exposed her to what their goals were, what the team wanted to accomplish, and that atmosphere and that event staffing work environment. And so get out there and like meet some people and in the field that you want to work in, and network, so you meet people because they're the ones who are going to tell you, hey, there's this job open up, or hey, you should think about this. Or when you're going to school, it's like you might say, like with your sports marketing department and college, a lot of them, that's where you start grooming the talent for the next generation. It's like you're getting that live experience there.
Yes, I love so much that you mentioned networking because that's a skill that is transferable to any career path that you choose. So how has networking really impacted your career path?
That's great. And when I think back about it, sometimes you just kind of think like, oh, I fell into this or I fell into that. And I think about that transition when I went from the Timberwolves to Nike. That was literally just like, I wasn't networking per se, like I was making calls and trying to like, meet people and stuff. But through the job with the Timberwolves, I was in Australia for an NBA promotional event for like a couple of weeks, which was an amazing experience. But I also met someone there who was turned out to be, he's a vice president for the NBA. He went to Nike then, and he started this production group there within Nike. Well, he's just cultivating based on who he knows and calling people to fill those spots. And he calls me up. And again, you realize like one job, you meet some people, and that's going to lead to your next job. And so that was really important for me, is like you end up meeting these people along the way, and they're the ones who kind of like give you those opportunities or point you in a direction where you can find new opportunities along the road.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting as you're an adult and you start looking back at all the different people you've met along the way. So many times, those key people that have really changed the trajectory of your life may have at one time been strangers. I know for me, that's true, to really look back at my professional journey and like, wow, had I never met that person, this would have never happened. So I think it's really important to encourage students to take advantage of every opportunity you have to meet new people and not be afraid to really approach people and even ask for help. Everyone is willing to lend a hand and help, especially if they know that you're really interested in what they do. So highly encouraged.
That's a great point. And one thing that I learned along the way too is that when you ask for help, not only are you going to get help, but all of a sudden you have somebody then in your corner who has a vested interest in your success because they are helping you out. If you fail along the way, then they kind of fail too. When you ask for help, like somebody's like, I helped Cudo along the way, I got him this job. I want to help him succeed because I helped him put him there. So it's like that asking for help thing has this like residual effect along the way. And I think that's really important to understand, and that people want to help. I mean, like, think about that whenever you help someone, how great a feeling that is. That's what you're doing it for somebody.
That is so, so true. Very true. Okay, so we have a few questions from students. The first question that we have is, do you have a favorite mascot? And if you do, which one is it?
I do have a favorite mascot. This sort of goes back to when I first cracked in the industry. He's still, if you put the Mount Rushmore of mascots on the wall, he's on there for almost anybody. But for me, and there's a personal connection. But the Phoenix Suns gorilla, and he's a friend of mine. He's the same dude that I met in 1989, which is crazy. He's older than I am, which he's the dinosaur. But it was great. He took me under his wing and really taught me a ton about the industry. And again, it's a good example of somebody who really helped me along the way. I'm indebted to him, and he takes some pride in the success that I've had because he knew that he helped Cudo out along the way. So it's a good relationship. But he's probably my favorite.
Yes. So kind of along the same lines, do you have a favorite moment of when you were a mascot that really just stands out to you?
Boy, I don't know. There's so many, and some of them, like, they're just like these little moments. Everyone thinks about like standing at center court and having this big moment in front of a crowd. But in the world of professional mascots, part of the job is connecting people off the court. And there's been just the moments where you're, I don't make this too sappy, but like you might be in a hospital dealing with some kids who are sick, and just knowing that, like, as you're there, you're kind of smoothing the edges for them a little bit. And those moments, they're more meaningful and they're more impactful than hitting a shot or making a dunk in front of a big crowd. There's definitely moments like that where I think back and kind of think like, wow, that was kind of cool to be at that point in that moment. But again, it's a lot of times in the mascot world, it's those kind of one-on-one things that you have and you experience where you're making an impact on a family or on a kid. So those are the ones that kind of come to mind as I think about like the best moments, the moments I appreciate the most.
Yes, I love that. And that's something you don't really think about all the time. Like you mentioned, you always think about being on the court or on the field, which is a perfect lead into my next question. It's pretty obvious what a mascot does at a sporting event, but what are some of the other responsibilities or events that a mascot does when they are not at the game?
That's a great question. And a lot of times, a big part of the mascot job is being essentially an ambassador in the community. Some mascots have a very narrow focus. They'll say, like, I'm going to focus on the big brother, big sister program in my town. And then they do literally, like 100 appearances for that, or they do reading programs, or they're outreaching like that. But for me, and a lot of what I did is I did some outreach with 5Ks. So it's funny, I had this thing called Moondog's 100K, which was I did 25K races. I didn't run them. I did run a couple, but I didn't run them. But I would go there to support essentially the Juvenile Diabetes Association or the, whatever, you name the cause, and you're there supporting them. And what I found was, again, like that's another part of the role, being that ambassador. You're showing and you're giving your support to that group by just being there and kind of spreading a little bit of excitement and a little bit of energy to the kickoff of their 5K. And so that's a good example where you're out in the community, you're playing a role because there's like, oh, hey, the guy from the Timberwolves is here, the guy from the Cavaliers is here. And you're showing that this is a cool event now, and you take some pictures. And again, it's connecting the team and the interests of the fans and building those relationships.
Yes, I love that so much. And, that drawing in the community, that goes back to marketing as well, too. Anytime that you can make those connections within the community, I think is a big aspect of every business when they're working on their marketing efforts. Not that that's the only reason to do it, but it is an aspect of it as well. So the last question that we have for you is, Do you get to meet and know the professional athletes that you work for their team?
That's a fun question. That is a little bit of a perk. I have rubbed elbows with Michael Jordan and LeBron James and Carl Lewis, the Brazil national soccer team, and players along the way from everyone, Kevin Garnett, and so it varies. And I think about this now. When I came to the Cavaliers, LeBron James actually arrived the same year he did, and I've met him and interacted with him a little bit. But it's funny, when I was with the Timberwolves, I would hang out. I went to a couple of players' weddings. I mean, it was but the difference was I was like peers with them at the time. I was in my 20s, they were in their 20s. Now I'm just an old man. I'm like the age of LeBron James' mom. So we don't really hang out. But no, you do get to meet a lot of athletes. I think one thing I think is funny about athletes is everyone has this perception that they're like, it's like they're just a bunch of guys. I remember I got to know Christian Laettner a little bit, and we would hang out. He's just like the most normal guy ever, other than he's been, the People magazine's 50 most beautiful people in the world. Other than that, he's just a normal dude. So, but yeah, you do get to meet some interesting people along the way, and that's definitely a little perk. And that's what people want to know about, which is funny. Everyone's like, did you meet him? Did you talk to him? I'm like, well, sure.
I love that. Well, I've had so much fun chatting with you today. You have such a great energy and bring to this interview. So my last little moment is, do you have any good piece of advice to leave with students before we wrap up today?
Oh boy. You bear the lead here. What's the big piece of advice?
No pressure.
I'll bring this back. I mentioned earlier, I'm a remote school teaching assistant, essentially, to my 12-year-old who's upstairs right now, hopefully doing math or whatever he's supposed to be doing right now. And I tell him something all the time, whether he's going to karate class or going to school. I say, hey, try your best and have fun. And those two things, like, you kind of can't go wrong. And if I'm in the fun business, so it's like, obviously I want to have fun, but I think that applies anywhere. If you just go in there and do your best, people like people who try hard, and try to have fun with what you're doing, whether that's interacting with employees and coworkers, or fans, if as the case may be. But if you go into it with just doing your best, making sure that you're diligently working at it, and you have fun, you kind of can't go wrong.
Yes. Try your best and have fun. Such a moment to live by.
I could have said, like, hey, what do I tell you all the time? I think he would have got there.
Perfect. Well, Jon Cudo, thank you for being with us. We have loved having you. Thank you to all of our listeners and watchers for tuning in. Be sure and join us next week. We'll have another industry professional.
Awesome. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Enjoy it.